And you can see pneumonia and influenza goes up, COVID goes up, that's driving the pneumonia and influenza deaths, and then pneumonia and influenza are in turn driving the overall death rate. So yeah, it's COVID. Getting into those younger age groups, you gotta zoom in.
But you actually saw a decline in deaths, which defies reason, right? It defies reason that you would think they would have just stayed right at the usual all-cause mortality for children.
But if you take children, and this again is from the CDC, their flu tracking, a typical flu season, you don't see children affected very much. You don't see that kind of bow-shaped curve in most flu seasons. It's generally flat. It's about 700 or so deaths a week because not many children die. But what was striking about this flu season, clearly as the lockdowns were beginning and COVID was killing people in other age groups, we saw this unexpected benefit or positive thing happening, which is deaths among children. Everyone under 18 started plummeting from 700 to in the neighborhood of 500 or a little bit more.
Look at that. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. We see a trend that is right. They're all right next to each other, and clearly, 2020, it is going down through the floor.
There could have been, schools out, people aren't partying, they aren't driving as much, there are fewer accidents. We asked ourselves what would be driving that drop. And the thing that you find and we found some other databases that actually break out finer age groupings, that most deaths among children are among infants. But infants and infant mortality, and if you measure it from 1 month to 1 year, that's where most deaths occur. And that's also where we saw this drop occurring. Clearly, this shift in all-cause mortality is coming from infants, children under 1 year of age. And it's sharp. It's, on the order of 150 to 200 deaths a week.
And it really then, you try to imagine what's happening in the lockdown that would be different. We have babies at home. They're always at home. Why would we see this sudden drop in infants? It really doesn't make a lot of sense that a lockdown would have any effect on that. But then you have this slide that shows how infants normally die. Can you explain what we're seeing here? So
we asked the question, what changes might plausibly drive a decline in infant deaths? Are mothers and fathers at home watching over their children more carefully? That I possibly, but you want to understand how infants typically die, and this basically breaks out, in a more detailed, fine way in ways that the tracking data don't allow us to break out. So this is a recent year, 2017, and deaths per 1,000 live births. There's some deaths that are just children that were born with a congenital malformation and they're kind of struggling from the start. That's a big cause of death. But the tied for the top leading cause of death is sudden infant death syndrome. Accidents are in the mix. Circulatory. Tragically, some children are killed, but those are things that may or may not change. I don't think congenital malformation would change because of COVID or get better. Accidents, possibly. Homicides, I think the argument is the other way, that people are more distressed now. But SIDS is a really good candidate.
Mark, when we look at
SIDS,
when we look at SIDS, let's just take a look at how the news is reporting on SIDS over the last several years. Take a look at this.
Across the state, babies are dying.
The numbers here are higher than the rest of the country, and they're going up.
The county's infant death rate is nearly double the healthy people target.
3 to 4 babies a week are dying in Georgia due to sudden infant death syndrome, known as SIDS.
A parent puts an infant to sleep and the child never wakes up.
What's causing this uptick in baby deaths?
Sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, is an unexplained death of an otherwise healthy baby.
While the actual cause of death cannot be nailed down, experts link SIDS to sleep time.
Was there something wrong with the baby? Did it have a medical history that we didn't know about? Is it up to date on its immunizations? Was the baby sick at the time of death?
We don't know in many cases what happens at the exact moment that babies stop breathing in SIDS.
But in nearly every case, there's no underlying illness.
Instead, we're watching this infant death rate go down. And you point out in your article, one of the things we should look at are these headlines. Let's take a look at the headlines we've been seeing when it comes to something that normally happens with babies. Vaccine rates drop dangerously as parents avoid doctors' visits. Afraid of COVID-19, parents are postponing well-child checkups, including shots, putting millions of children at risk of exposure to preventable deadly diseases. Clearly, that didn't happen. Vaccine rates for all ages dropped dramatically during COVID-19. And then I think we even had the CDC was weighing in on the same thing, saying, effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Look at these charts. These are vaccine rates plummeting amongst children under the age of, we have 24 months and under, and then 24 to 18 years. Plummeting vaccine rates, and we were told by the CDC in all of these headlines, this is going to lead to an increase in death, especially when we had a virus running around the country, and instead the opposite is true. I guess to your average layperson, what are you talking about? What does this mean? Except that, as you know, Mark, and I know you've met so many of these parents, but we've interviewed on our own show, the Catone family that lost their child, Katie Clovis, multiple different interviews with parents that really believe they lost their child right after vaccination. And so, as someone that you always tend to be more conservative, I think, than I do, Mark. But when you look at these numbers, what does it say to you? I mean, can you rule out now that, SIDS is not being caused by vaccination? I mean, it seems like this really puts vaccination right on the bullseye as a target of something that we should be looking at more seriously.
Well, two things. One is I am conservative, and there is the pitfall that correlation does not always equal causation. So we have to have a hypothesis about causation. But clearly, this drop in infant deaths is a major discontinuity. And so something big would have to change in order to drive that larger change in that health outcome. And what it basically suggests is the lockdown is creating a natural experiment that is creating a massive benefit that we should take seriously. And what hypotheses could you have? Well, you could have a few. We've thrown out a number, but the vaccine and SIDS connection is a clear hypothesis that a lot of people carry around, and it's controversial for sure, but I can't imagine a better explanation for this outcome in this natural experiment than the fact that we are seeing a collapse in visits to the pediatrician. So, I'm conservative, Dallas, but I also believe the parents, and I've met too many parents that have had this tragic outcome happen, and I've seen there's a lot of science that supports this issue. So here we are in this natural experiment. We're seeing this huge benefit in terms of saving infant lives. What's saving their lives? Well, maybe it's because they're not going to the doctor.